Alright everyone, we start off today with another Twitter Files batch. Matt Taibbi, of course, putting it out there. I've got the actual link open. It's in the description. You can read through all the posts yourself. A comic interlude. I wanted to read a couple of them verbatim myself, though. Went through it this morning, and most of it is a recap of what we've seen, although it does dig a little bit deeper at times, talking about some of the really screwy requests that were sent by members of the government to Twitter in order to get people censored. A lot of it boils down, and it's not just Democrats that did this, by the way. A lot of the unipartyist Republicans have delved into the same basic framework. A lot of it appears to be aimed specifically at people trying to use Twitter's methodology for their own political purposes, in the sense of trying to keep outsiders out of politics. Now, necessarily, this means a lot of MAGA individuals. But there are cases here where leftoids were actually targeted too, and it harkens back to something that I talked about years and years ago, when tech censorship first started becoming more of a thing. I remember one specific instance. It also ties into the IRS scandal as well. We'll get into that, but that's even older. As far as the internet goes, I can remember an instance on Facebook, I think it would have been 2013 or thereabouts, in which a bunch of pages were removed from Facebook, pages of a socio-political nature mainly, and people were crying foul. And most of that crying foul came from the Tea Party at the time. And by the way, nothing was done then and nothing presumptively will be done now, although at least they are looking into it. To be clear, Kevin McCarthy is on my shit list, but he is doing most of the things that he pledged that he would expediently do, so he's at least appearing to make an effort, so we'll wait and see what occurs. Despite the fact that most of the whining about the censorship came from the right, and they had every reason to be pissed because a shit ton of their pages were removed. Pro-gun pages, libertarian-leaning pages, certainly anything Ron Paul revolution related was on the chopping block according to Zuckerberg. But then there were also progressive groups, progressive so-called, of course, that were removed as a cop block. A cop block is not, for instance, a right-wing sort of thing. That came out of the far left, like the Occupy hippie left. And so political outsiders. The Lois Lerner IRS scandal, when the IRS was cock-blocking people for nonprofit status for political reasons. It was cast off mainly as this is an attack on the right wing, allowing uniparty Republicans to bitch about it too with a straight face. But some of the groups that they didn't want in there, or that the neolibs didn't want in, left-wing groups, were similarly treated. That is indeed what we see here. What happens is that the uniparty wants to consolidate power. That uniparty is a monolithic entity. Neoliberals and neocons are fundamentally the same thing. When they frame it to the public, though, they break it down into two partisan cores because the parties themselves don't matter. But if you were to focus on broad ideology, you'd find the unipartists are lock, stock, and barrel. They're in favor of war. They're in favor of protectionist trade policies. They're in favor of taxing you more. Yeah, the Republicans really have been a low-tax party for a long time. A 1% reduction in your personal income tax really goes a long way. The only group from within that partisan core that's tackled issues, guns and so forth, from a genuinely conservative perspective is the MAGA Republicans. If we look at the Democratic Party, only the post-Occupy grift-left core, people like AOC and Ilhan Omar, stand for leftoid values. And so necessarily, if you're a unipartyist and you've got someone coming from one of these extreme fringes, I would say that does apply to some of the leftoids, although they're not being targeted for actually that reason. Again, it's for neoliberal purposes. It's for corporate dem purposes. Naturally, if you are enabled by this partnership between Facebook, Twitter, etc., and the government to potentially ask them to remove material that is politically or socially unhelpful for you, or potentially for one of your corporate donors, one of your other buddies in Congress, you're doing it on behalf of a friend with less clout than you, why wouldn't it be used? And in fact, that is what this shows. You have Republicans doing it. You have Democrats doing it, although it was more profuse among Democrats because the biggest outsider bloc that actually has political clout is MAGA. It's going to be disproportionately from that particular end. I've faced dogpiling in the past for representing this censorship debate as being primarily about that uniparty power core and the desire to perpetuate corporate cash because the two are tied at the hip. I get people saying, no, it's a commie takeover. Well, there are commies that are trying to push censorship. I don't deny that whatsoever. What we see, though, with this particular instance, predominantly, are neolib, neocon unipartyists working together behind the scenes through third and sometimes fourth parties, going through Intel or going directly to the platforms themselves. It depends on the situation, to try to silence opposition, to work around the First Amendment, or to attempt to, by silencing lawful speech by U.S. citizens, making their lives difficult. This is disproportionately aimed at larger creators because, of course, you're running for the Senate in a tight race, and your enemy has these accounts that are amplifying their message and memeing you. Well, you're not going to go after the account with 2 followers. You're probably going to go after the bigger ones. You're going to claim that they're botting. Well, they're using this same hashtag, and this totally non-profit organization has identified it as potentially Russian disinfo. You must ban them in the interest of national security. Think of the children. Where have we heard this before? The country will fall if people are allowed to have free speech online, and we see this in the original congressional testimony by people like Yoel Roth. Some of these people actually believe that. They didn't have to be particularly compelled, except situationally, to engage in this behavior. Yoel Roth put it perfectly himself with the reigning opinion of the neolib corporate sort of crooksters that are in D.C., that too much free speech actually makes less speech. Speech gets less free if you let people say what they want to say. Now, of course, that doesn't actually make any sense. It's not actually true. It's sloganeering. It's ass-covering, because you're before potentially hostile members of Congress that you did not help out. I would point out that if you had, they would be a little bit more amenable to the concept. They would nod politely and say, yes, my opponent got deboosted by 5%. That's why I got reelected. Well, I'll softball Yoel Roth here a little bit, or Vagina over there, or any of these other people that are taking the stand. This is a prevalent problem. I would say it is comic. It's literally like something out of 1984. By the way, Orwell definitely trending a little bit lately with Roald Dahl and the Stalinization of puffin books from the past. Such very outrageous and extreme messaging from books such as James and the Giant Peach or Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Yes, the messaging in there must be changed. There's a literal Orwell quote that talks about this very process and predicts, by the way, that it'll have culminated before the year 2050. I can't wait until they Stalinize 1984 itself, and nobody appears to be doing anything about it other than bitching. Pro tip, get actual physical books. If you're going to store them digitally, that's fine too. Store them locally on removable media, because soon your computers will start editing things for you through telemetry. Yeah, that will happen. It's already possible with Apple products. They've actually done it before. It's definitely possible if you're stupid enough to use cloud storage. Hint, hint, there is no cloud. It's someone else's physical server and you don't own your own data. That's why it can be censored and there's nothing you can do about it. So take proprietary control. There are ways to do this. Get a good Linux system. Get an older Windows computer for the actual storage of the files. Get some USB drives and shit like that. Only be a matter of time before they push for computer systems that are physically incapable of accessing certain marked files because they contain verboten material. And they'll cast it the same way that they're casting this. Well, we had to think of the children. Russian disinfo was a danger to the entire republic. We had to violate the First Amendment. We had to, take out our political opponents that were becoming a problem for us, left, right, and center, because otherwise the republic will fall. No, really what it's about is that their careers would fall. That's why they engaged in the behavior. The original principle is a deep state authoritarian op that casts itself off as fighting disinformation. Really, the real disinfo is the claim of disinfo 9 times out of 10. But it was additionally, and that's what we're seeing in this thread, used on a more personal level by individuals. It's sort of like NSA spying. It harkens back to that too. Do you remember Love Int? When we were getting the series of NSA releases, which embarrassed the NSA and CIA and other groups as well, at first it's like, well, there's this big authoritarian spying apparatus that's sweeping up all of your data. Then we found out, and it was almost immediately hushed up, that private field agents, we're not talking about higher-ups, could pull people's information at the click of a button, unilaterally, without violating any rule, to look into what their girlfriend or boyfriend was doing, to look into people that they didn't like from high school, or whatever the hell else they wanted to do. They could be stalking someone, using taxpayer money. Nothing was ever done about this. This is why I can't forgive Ted Cruz, because that program goes on uninhibited for all intents and purposes. They just have the data stored off-site, so the government doesn't store it directly anymore. Somehow this makes it not a violation of the First Amendment. You can expect a similar attempt here with this particular censorship apparatus. It will probably not go anywhere. It will simply be, the government will put one more wall of separation between itself and the tech firms, while insinuating that they should continue doing the same thing. Rather sad. That's about all. Peace out.